On the afternoon of October the 3rd, 1993, Delta Force operators, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Air Force technicians set off from their base outside of the Somalian capital of Mogadishu with the aim of snatching Somalian warlord Mohammed Adid's top lieutenants. On one of the Black Hawk helicopters, call sign Super 62, were two Delta Force operators called Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart, and they will be the main topic of this video for their incredibly brave actions later in the conflict. The American mission was expected to last around an hour or two, all going well. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite go to plan. Within moments of the Americans leaving the relative safety of the Mogadishu International Airport, the city came alive with the news of the incoming American helicopters and Humvees, and the plan quickly unravelled, as local Somalian militiamen began to gather in alarming numbers, and soon a ferocious firefight broke out between the small but highly trained American force and what seemed like the entire city of Mogadishu. Things went from bad to worse when a Black Hawk helicopter, call sign Super 61, was shot down, killing the pilots and seriously wounding the passengers. Black Hawk helicopter, call sign Super 64, piloted by Mike Durant, was orbiting the crash site when suddenly an RPG smashed into its tail rotor. Within a few moments, the rotor began to disintegrate. The helicopter began to spin dangerously out of control. Nearby, Super 62, the helicopter carrying Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart, circled above the new crash site and began to provide overwatch cover, firing at any locals who got too close. The two Delta Force operators requested permission from above to insert themselves on the ground and provide what assistance they could to the stricken and wounded crew of Super 64. As they waited, a mob started to gather, and the number of militia and locals began to swell. Commanders denied the men's request twice, before eventually relenting and giving the men the go-ahead to insert themselves on the ground. This essentially was a one-way ticket, and both men knew it. Other US ground elements weren't nearby, and the chance of rescue or backup was zero, but they trusted each other, and they wanted to buy the wounded crew as much time as possible. When the men arrived at the crash site, they initially found all of the crew alive. Pilot Mike Durant was conscious enough to handle a weapon, so he was given one for self-defense once he was pulled out of the helicopter. The two Delta Force operators then set up the best perimeter they could and began to defend the aircraft and the crew from a huge overwhelming force, armed only with two rifles and their personal sidearms. They were heavily outnumbered and lacked any fire support whatsoever. Militia troops began to rush the crash site, firing a hail of bullets towards the Americans who desperately clung on to their tiny perimeter. They picked their targets carefully and inflicted dozens of casualties on the enemy. It's believed that Randy Shughart was killed first, and according to their Medal of Honor citations, this was the case, so I shall be following that narrative. Shughart's death left Gordon alone to defend the crew. He went back to Mike Durant and gave him Shughart's weapon. He wished him good luck before circling back to the front of the helicopter, where he stood alone against a growing mob. Eventually, he ran out of rifle ammunition and was forced to use his pistol on anyone who dared pop into his line of vision. Eventually, though, he was also overwhelmed and gunned down. Mike Durant was the only American left conscious, and when the militia found him and the rest of the wounded crew, they proceeded to beat them senselessly. Durant was eventually taken prisoner and spared. Gordon, Shughart, and the crew's bodies were stripped and paraded through the streets of Mogadishu. They were, though, eventually recovered. Both men were posthumously awarded America's highest award, the Medal of Honor, for their incredible bravery in protecting the crew of Super 64. They were the first recipients of the medal since the Vietnam War, and without the two men and their heroic actions, it's highly likely that Mike Durant would have been killed. Instead, he was eventually released by the militia. He made his way back to the States, was reunited with his family, and remained in the military. The battle overall will be viewed as a tactical success for the Americans, but it left 18 Americans dead, and within 6 months, American forces eventually pulled out of Somalia itself. The battle was made into a movie, directed by Ridley Scott, called Black Hawk Down. The movie shows the heroic actions of the two Delta Force operators. That concludes today's episode. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and drop me a comment as well. We'll see you all on the next one. Cheery bye.